In this video, we're going to take a closer look at the final phase of the English language, which is known as Modern English. And so this is the version of the English language that is used today. So we can start by asking ourselves, when does the Modern English period begin? We had pretty good dates for early English and, Old English and Middle English. For Modern English, it's a bit more debated. A lot of scholars will say 1476 is a good date for it. And why that date in particular? This is the year that the printing press was invented. And so the printing press allows text to be widely distributed to a larger audience. It's going to correlate with the greater distribution of the English language to a reading audience. And along with that, English is naturally going to start to settle down in terms of its changes. And that's not to say that English doesn't change. It does every day. Languages which are spoken and used are living things. They are constantly in a state of change. But it's not going to suffer the same changes to spelling, to the use of which letters belong to the alphabet, to things like that. And so in that sense, it settles down into one form, which is Modern English. So 1476 is often cited. Now, for some people, this is a bit too early, and they'll say, okay, well, 1476 is when early Modern English begins, and then we should distinguish a sort of true Modern English period, and they would put that a bit later. They put that in the year 1755. And the reason for 1755 is because in that year, a man named Samuel Johnson published the first, I misspelled his name, he should have an H here, the first dictionary of the English language. And so that too is a stabilizing influence on the English language. When the dictionary comes out, it says what each word means, right? And also how each word is spelled. I mentioned when talking about Middle English that spelling is very variable in the earlier periods. Even in a single text by one author, you will see words spelled different ways because it's just how it sounds to you at the moment. But with the publication of the dictionary, and again, the more widespread reading of English and printing of English, then we begin to see spelling become stabilized, grammatical usage become stabilized, usage of vocabulary words become stabilized in a new way. And so this is often seen as another hallmark of Modern English. Okay, so what is going on in terms of the structure of English at this point? It's, become the kind of English that we as modern English speakers are used to. And that's not to say it doesn't change within this period. If you've ever read Shakespeare, you've probably had the experience of saying, well, I can read this, but it's not the way I talk. It's not the way I write. And of course, this is because Shakespeare is writing at the end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th. And so 300 years have passed, and of course the language has changed. But in general, modern English represents the form that we use today. So what do we see? In terms of letters, J and V finally make it into the alphabet. They have got K, Q, Z, W as well. So we now have the full alphabet of modern English that we're used to, the 26-letter alphabet. The earlier letters that were used in the Old English period, we said those had died out. And actually, that's not quite true. Thorn had continued to be used for quite a while. However, the way that this letter was written changed. It actually began to be written pretty much like a Y, right? Thorn was represented in this Y, and that finally drops out and is no longer used. And this is why, if you've ever seen a sign that says something like ye old shop, right? You might have thought, why ye? It's really the. That Y is standing in for a thorn, which makes a th sound, so that's supposed to say the old shop, which is sort of a misconception that people have. But at this point, that Y drops out, and we begin to see TH used anywhere that a thorn had been used before. So we have achieved the modern English alphabet. In terms of spellings and pronunciations, we have these few consonant combinations that appear at the beginning of words in English. KN as in night and knee, GN as in gnaw, WR as in right. And in earlier periods, you pronounced both of these letters. Night was knikt, knife was knifa, gnaw is gnaw, right is warita. right? And only in the modern English period do these fall silent. And so we don't really pronounce the K, the G, and the W in these consonant combinations anymore. We still spell it that way, right? Which is one of the many reasons English can be a challenge to learn. We still keep it in the spelling, but we now just say night, gnaw, right. So this happens in the modern English period. GH, right? Previously was pronounced as a kind of like a breathy H, like or knicht, right? Kind of in the back of the mouth. Now it is pronounced in one of two ways. It is either not pronounced, think of the English word though, this GH is not pronounced whatsoever, or it becomes a f sound. Think of an English word like enough, where this becomes a f sound. So there are two routes that this takes. It's based on essentially two different dialects of English. In one, GH had this f sound. In one, the GH was not pronounced in words. And so some words take after one dialect, some words take after another. And again, it causes confusion when you're trying to learn it. Okay, and the major thing that's happening in terms of spelling and pronunciation is what is known as the Great Vowel Shift. In the early modern English period, the way that the English language pronounces its long vowels, and it really just affects the long vowels, pretty much they all just changed. So how the long vowels were pronounced in Middle English completely changes to the modern English period and to what we now know. So I'm going to give you a few examples. We'll look at A, E, and I. All right, so I'm going to put the long marks over them to indicate long A, long E, and long I. So we're in Middle English, long A was pronounced like a, as in hat, right? Really what would be a short A for us today. And then in the modern English period, it finally gets that A sound that we associate with long A in English, as in hate. For E in Middle English, long E in Middle English was pronounced in two ways. It was either pronounced kind of like a long A as in bait, or like a short E as in bet. So you can either get that as A or eh. And now it takes on this long E quality we know, E as in meat, right? E. Long I in the Middle English period was pronounced like long E, as in beat. And only in the modern English period does it take on this I sound, which we use in modern English today, as in bite. O is also affected and so forth, but these are some general examples of this great vowel shift. And so the pronunciation of a lot of words changes, and that will affect the eventual spelling that they all take on, their standard spelling that they get once we start to see dictionaries and things like that. Along with all of this, there are even fewer inflectional endings. English has just been dropping them since the Middle English period, and again, this is because English is being spoken by more and more people across the world, and in order to make it a little bit easier, and I know English still has its challenges, the getting rid of all these inflectional endings that you would otherwise have to memorize and remember which one goes where makes it a little bit more straightforward. So we have even fewer until we reach this point where modern English has very few inflectional endings compared to a lot of its cognate languages. Okay. So that's pretty much it for structure. In terms of vocabulary, this is when we see a true explosion in the vocabulary of the English language. So we go from the Middle English period where there are, maybe 50,000 words, to the modern English period where, depending on how you count, we have somewhere between 500,000 to over 1 million words, right? The lower end generally excludes technical scientific terms like deoxyribonucleic acid, something that's not in everyday speech. But if you add in all those scientific technical terms, then English has well over 1 million words in its vocabulary, which is just an incredible number. So these are, by and large, introduced here in the modern English period. And there are two major sources. Okay, so tons and tons of words are just invented. And we have talked about all the various ways you can invent words. But really, a lot of what's going on is classical compounding. Coining new words by taking Latin and Greek roots and putting them together to create a suitable English word. And this is happening largely in the context of scientific and academic spheres. Especially in the sciences, right? The sciences are emerging as disciplines that people are studying and pursuing in rigorous ways. And as this happens, they're creating a vocabulary for themselves that describes their techniques, their instruments, their processes, their discoveries. And when they want new words, they turn to the classical languages to provide the morphs for them. Why not English? Well, one of the big reasons for this is that both the Greeks and the Romans have an established scientific tradition, or at least they had in the ancient world, right? Especially the Greeks. The Greeks were renowned as for medicine, for instance, as doctors, study of anatomy, as well as biology, and sort of the beginnings of chemistry and physics. We wouldn't really consider what they were doing in the ancient world chemistry or physics, but some of the groundwork was being laid by them. And so the people who are engaging in scientific work at this time have come up through an educational system that exposed them to those kinds of texts and thinkers and ideas. And so it's almost natural for them when they say, I'm going to study medicine and I'm going to talk about physiology and anatomy, and now I need a word, to use Greek roots, because that's the basis, that's sort of the foundation of their knowledge, and that's where a lot of their terminology lies. So we have these kind of Greek, and to a lesser extent Roman, scientific traditions that they are drawing on, that they are educated in, that they are building on. Another reason, and this is something we've mentioned before, is that the people in Western Europe who are engaging in science at this time would have been educated in their youth, right? They would have attended some sort of schooling, and those schools are frequently attached to churches. And that changes as we get closer and closer to our period. But often universities and schools were attached to churches. And so they have a sort of a classical education that they receive there, not sort of similar to the education we saw going on in the Old English and even Middle English periods. And so that's an education that is grounded in Latin, right? Latin and Greek as well are languages that you study when you go to school, that you read texts in. And then that means that when you grow up and you begin to do your own scientific work, writing in Latin is a way to be able to connect with all other educated people. And so Latin, it becomes the language of science. More so than Greek, and maybe that seems strange because I said Greek has the stronger scientific tradition and a lot of their foundational words come from Greek, but Latin was the language of the church and therefore the language of schools, and so while you may well have learned Greek as well, Latin really is the primary language that people are using to communicate. So Latin becomes the language of science, and scientific treatises and texts are written in Latin for many hundreds of years in the modern English period. And so it makes sense that you would just use Latin words to fill in what you need rather than drawing on English. English words don't slot into Latin very easily. So for this reason, classical compounding is a humongous source of words. It's not the only source though. Sometimes they simply borrow a word directly from Greek or Latin if they need to. Sometimes it's more a matter of affixation, and some of the other modes of invention are also at play in this time, but classical compounding accounts for a lot. Now I do want to note something along the lines of classical compounding, and that is that, like I said, they're drawing their morphs from the classical languages, from Greek and Latin, and those morphs have a meaning, right, that they held in their original language. Sometimes the morphs just keep their original meaning. They just choose a morph that fits the meaning, whose meaning happens to be what they need. Sometimes they assign a new meaning to a morph. And in this case, sometimes that morph replaces, the new meaning replaces the old meaning of the morph that was in use before. Sometimes both are used going forward. Let me give you an example to clarify what I am talking about. So, here's one that we looked at. Galact. We said galact means two things. It means milk and it means galaxy, right? Which are very strangely different things. Milk is its original meaning. Its meaning, it's extended to galaxy, we said, because the Greeks identified the Milky Way, the spray of stars in the sky, as looking like a spray of milk. And so that connection is made, and it gains a new meaning of galact, galaxy, pertaining to a galaxy. And so both of these are in use in English. The meaning galaxy is more common. We see words like intergalactic, for instance, but we also occasionally see words where galact still means milk. A galactagogue, for instance, is something that is given to women, nursing women who need to increase their milk supply. Another example, Electra, E-L-E-C-T-R. So you can probably guess the meaning of Electra as a root. It means electric, right? But that's a new meaning that was assigned to this morph in the modern English period. Electra originally comes from a word meaning amber, the substance amber. So it was assigned this new meaning of electricity in the modern period. And it's because amber, when you rub it against materials, you can create static electricity. And so this phenomenon was first noted and named after amber. But in this case, no, we don't have any English words that use electra in them that mean amber anymore. This has been entirely replaced by the new meaning of electric or electricity. So I want to introduce just a couple others. I'll just give you a few new morphs to work with. So we've seen galact before. I don't make you memorize Electra because I assume anyone who sees Electra can figure out what it means. But here are a few others that are worth being familiar with. One is CYT, C-Y-T. If you're in biology, you maybe know or have a sense of what this means already. Its new meaning, its meaning today is cell. But it actually comes from a Greek word which means basket. A cell is in the human body is like a tiny little basket, right? Or a little receptacle, something like that. Now, the meaning of basket has been completely replaced, this original meaning, and the modern meaning of cell is really all you see. So you see this in like erythrocytes and leukocytes, red and white blood cells, cytoplasm, which is the stuff in the cell that's not the actual parts of the cells, the organelles or whatnot. Okay, so we have the original meaning, the modern meaning, and the modern has replaced the original. Chlor, C-H-L-O-R. So if you think chlor, you may immediately think of chlorine or chlorophyll, and these are both modern words. It comes from a Greek word meaning a kind of light green-yellow color. Right? And today it usually means referring to, or it often means referring to the element of chlorine. And this is because chlorine was given this root because of its color. It's light greenish yellow color. And so now when you think about chlorine or chloride in chemistry or anything to do with that, it really means having to do with chlorine. In this case, though, we do see a persistence of this green-yellow sense. And in a word like chlorophyll, chlorophyll is the substance in leaves, that's the phyll part, that makes it green in color. So in this case, both of these meanings persist. Narc. Narc's original meaning is sleep, or really a deep sleep. And then a newer meaning is added to it of drugs, right? Narcotics. Today, when we see narc, it often means drugs when we talk about narcotics and things that are related to that, although the original meaning is also preserved in some places. If you've ever heard the condition of narcolepsy, it literally means sleep seizure, but narcolepsy is when you fall asleep uncontrollably. Just in the midst of your daily routine, you can just fall asleep for a period of time. So in that sense, it maintains its original sense of sleep. Okay, let's add a few more. And I'm going to add the O there because it's often at the front and it's a little bit easier to, I think, recognize if you have the infix O attached to it. Its original meaning is mouse. Actually from the word mus in Greek, and so it's cognate with mouse very closely. But it takes on the meaning of muscle, right? A muscle in the body. The idea seems to have been that a muscle looks a bit like a mouse under your skin, which is a gross image, but okay. And I want to note that this actually happens back in the Greek period. So this is a Greek root, and for the Greeks, they started out with myo meaning mouse, and then they made the connection and applied it to muscle. And so both of these meanings are caught up in English, although muscle really wins out because that's the technical one. Similarly, you've got carcin. For the Greeks, it meant a crab, and then it's applied to tumors or a cancer. And again, this happens in the Greek period. They're the ones that make this association and give it the secondary meaning, and then it is brought into English where the second meaning is much more widely used. And the last one I'll note is neuro. Neuro means a string originally in Greek, like a string for a bow if you're doing bow and arrow, or an instrument. And then it gets extended to mean a nerve, right? Like a nerve in the body. And again, this happens in the Greek period. They're the ones that make the association and begin to use neuron to refer to a nerve as well. And then in the modern English usage, the more modern one, the secondary meaning, is what is used. So these are just some examples. Now, the other way that English vocabulary explodes is through borrowing, but we are going to look at that in a separate lecture a little bit later on. All right, so that's kind of our overview of modern English for now. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.